What kind of child gives away her last meal to a stranger she'll never see again? The question hung in the cold Brooklyn air that afternoon, unnoticed by the crowds rushing past with coffee cups and ringing phones, unnoticed by the city that had long learned how to look away. Amara Brooks sat on a cracked concrete step outside a corner store, her small fingers wrapped around a slightly crushed sandwich, the paper thin and damp from the grease seeping through. It wasn't much, just peanut butter and jelly on cheap white bread, but to her it was everything. It was lunch. It was dinner if she stretched it slowly enough. It was the only thing her mother had managed to leave on the table before rushing out for another double shift cleaning offices downtown. Across from her, a boy sat quietly on the curb, his shoes too clean for this neighborhood, his jacket too well made, his silence too controlled. He didn't cry. He didn't ask for help. He just watched the ground like he was waiting for something the world had forgotten to deliver. Amara noticed him the way she noticed everything, softly, without judgment. She tilted her head slightly, studying his face, the way his hands rested neatly in his lap, the way he swallowed once, slowly, like he was trying to ignore the hunger clawing inside him. For a moment, she looked down at her sandwich, then back at him. The city roared around them, cars honking, a subway rumbling beneath the pavement, voices overlapping into noise. But in that small pocket of space, everything felt strangely still. Amara peeled back the paper, revealing the sandwich, then hesitated. Her stomach tightened, reminding her how long it had been since breakfast, if you could even call a half glass of milk breakfast. She could eat now. No one would blame her. No one was watching. But then the boy's eyes flickered up, just for a second, and in that second something shifted. Without a word, Amara broke the sandwich in half. Not evenly. She paused again, then carefully adjusted the pieces, making one slightly bigger than the other. The bigger half. She extended her hand across the small gap between them. "You can have it," she said quietly, her voice steady in, a way no 8-year-old's voice should have to be. "I'm not that hungry." It was a lie. A small one. A gentle one. But a lie all the same. The boy didn't reach for it right away. He looked at her first, really looked at her, as if trying to understand something he had never seen before. Then, slowly, he accepted the sandwich. "Thank you," he said, his voice soft, careful, almost practiced. Amara just nodded, pulling her knees closer to her chest, pretending the smaller half in her lap was enough. High above the street, behind the dark tint of an SUV window, a pair of eyes had been watching the entire exchange in silence. And for the first time in a very long time, those eyes did not look away. What kind of world ignores a hungry child, but bows instantly to power the moment it arrives? The question lingered beneath the surface of that Brooklyn street, invisible to everyone except the man watching from behind tinted glass. Inside the black SUV, Victor Hale sat perfectly still, one hand resting lightly against the leather armrest, the other holding a phone he had long since stopped looking at. The city moved for him. Deals closed, calls answered, doors opened without question. But right now, his attention was fixed on something that made no sense in his world. A little girl giving away her food. "You think it's random?" one of his men asked quietly from the front seat, careful not to turn around fully. "Could be someone put her there. People get creative when they want attention." Victor didn't respond. His eyes remained on Amara Brooks, small and still on that broken step, watching her pretend to chew the smaller half of a sandwich she barely touched. In his world, nothing was random. Every action had intention. Every kindness had a price. That was how people survived or how they got erased from the board. And yet, something didn't fit. The boy, his son, sat there calmly, eating without hesitation, without fear. That alone was unusual. The child had been trained from birth to recognize danger, to stay alert, to read people before trusting them. But here he was, accepting food from a stranger without a second thought. Victor's jaw tightened slightly. "Bring him back," he said finally, his voice low, controlled, leaving no room for interpretation. The man in the front seat nodded immediately, reaching for the radio. But Victor lifted a finger, just enough to stop him. "Not yet." The word hung there, quiet but absolute. Outside, Amara shifted slightly, pulling her thin jacket closer around her shoulders as a gust of wind slipped down the block. The temperature had dropped into the low 50s, cold enough to sting bare fingers, colder still when you hadn't eaten enough. She glanced at the boy again. "You got somewhere to go?" she asked gently. He shook his head once. "They'll find me," he replied. The way he said it, calm, certain, made her pause. Most kids would sound scared, lost, but not him. There was something steady in his voice, something that didn't belong to the street, this moment, this kind of life. Amara frowned slightly, trying to understand, but she didn't push. She just nodded like that answer was enough. Up in the SUV, Victor leaned forward just a fraction, his eyes narrowing. "He's too comfortable," he murmured, almost to himself. "Yes, sir," the driver replied carefully. "Which means..." Victor didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. It meant variables, unknowns, risk. His gaze returned to Amara. She wasn't looking around for approval. She wasn't watching to see who noticed. She wasn't performing. She was just there, existing, giving. And that made her more suspicious, not less. Because in Victor Hale's world, innocence wasn't something you trusted. It was something you questioned until it broke. "Watch her," he said quietly. "Everything she does." The order was simple, but beneath it, something unfamiliar stirred. Something that didn't belong in a man who built his empire on control. Outside, Amara brushed a crumb off her hand and gave the boy a small, almost shy smile. He looked back at her, thoughtful, like he was seeing something he didn't fully understand. And for a brief moment, in the middle of a city that never slowed down, two completely different worlds sat side by side, balanced on a single act of kindness that was about to change everything. Why did the boy wait before taking the first bite? Like, he was remembering something he wasn't supposed to forget? The question lingered in the cold air as Amara Brooks watched him carefully, her small hands tucked under her legs to keep them warm. Most kids would have eaten fast, almost desperately, but he didn't. He held the sandwich for a moment, studying it, as if measuring something far beyond hunger. Then, slowly he took a bite, controlled, neat, almost polite. Amara blinked. That wasn't normal. Not here. Not for someone sitting on a cracked curb in Brooklyn with no one around. She tilted her head slightly. "You don't sound like you're from around here," she said, her voice soft but curious. The boy swallowed, then looked at her again, his eyes steady in a way that felt older than his age. "I'm not," he replied simply. "No explanación. No hesitación. Just truth without details." Amara frowned a little, not suspicious, just thoughtful. "You got a name?" she asked. The boy paused, just for a second. "Ethan," he said. It came out smoothly, but something about the pause before it made the air shift ever so slightly. Amara didn't notice the lie, but somewhere else someone did. Inside the SUV, Victor Hale's gaze sharpened almost imperceptibly. "That's not the name he uses at home," one of the men murmured under his breath, barely audible. Victor didn't respond, but his fingers tapped once against the armrest, a subtle sign of attention. Outside, Amara gave a small smile. "I'm Amare." She pointed to herself, then to him. "Now we're not strangers anymore." Ethan, if that was his name, looked at her like she had just said something important, something he hadn't heard before. Strangers. The word lingered. In his world, everyone was either known or watched. There was no in-between. And yet here she was, drawing a line in a way that made it feel simple. He took another bite of the sandwich, slower this time. "Why did you give it to me?" he asked. Amara shrugged, like the answer was obvious. "Because you looked hungry." "So do you," he said quietly. The words landed gently, but they landed. Amara froze for a split second, then quickly looked away, brushing invisible crumbs off her jacket. "I'm fine," she muttered. Another lie, smaller than the first, but heavier. Up in the SUV, Victor leaned back slightly, his eyes never leaving the scene. He had spent years reading people, spotting weakness, deception, leverage. And right now, Everything about this moment contradicted what he knew to be true. The girl wasn't trying to impress. She wasn't fishing for sympathy. If anything, she was hiding it. And that made her harder to understand. "Sir," the driver said quietly, "we should move soon. Too much exposure." Victor didn't answer immediately. His gaze lingered on Amara as she tucked her hands deeper into her sleeves, her shoulders tightening against the cold. She wasn't watching for help. She wasn't looking for anyone to notice. She had already made her choice and accepted it. "Give it another minute," Victor said finally. His voice was calm, but something beneath it had shifted. Outside, Ethan finished the last bite and looked down at the empty wrapper in his hands. For the first time, there was something uncertain in his expression. Not fear, not confusion, something quieter, like realization. He glanced at Amara again, really seeing her now. The thin jacket, the careful stillness, the way she tried not to show she was cold. And for a moment, the world he came from didn't feel as certain as it used to. What if kindness doesn't just get ignored, but gets judged as something suspicious? The thought settled quietly over the street as the moment stretched just a little too long, as if something unseen was preparing to shift. Amara Brooks rubbed her hands together, her breath faintly visible in the cool air, trying to ignore the hollow feeling in her stomach that had only grown sharper after giving most of her sandwich away. Across from her, Ethan folded the empty wrapper carefully, not crumpling it like most kids would, but smoothing it out like it mattered. That detail didn't belong here. Amara noticed it, even if she didn't fully understand why. "You always do that?" she asked softly. Ethan glanced up. "Do what?" "Say thank you like that. Eat like that." She hesitated, searching for the right words. Like you're in school or something." Ethan paused, the question catching him off guard. In a way nothing else had so far. "I was taught to," he said finally. Again simple, controlled, but not complete. Amara nodded slowly, accepting the answer even if it didn't quite satisfy her curiosity. She wasn't the kind of person who pushed. She didn't need every answer to keep being kind. But somewhere else, someone was pushing. Inside the SUV, Victor Hale's gaze had hardened just slightly, the kind of subtle shift that only those closest to him would recognize. "He's choosing his words," one of the men observed quietly. "Yes," Victor replied, his voice low, almost thoughtful. "And she isn't." That difference mattered more than anything else. One child calculating, the other simply being. Victor had spent his entire life around people who calculated, who measured every word, every gesture, every moment for advantage. It was survival. It was power. And yet, watching Amara Brooks, none of that applied. She wasn't performing. She wasn't adapting. She was just honest. And that made her dangerous in a way his world didn't understand. "She's either very smart," the driver said carefully, "or very naive." Victor didn't answer right away. His eyes remained fixed on the girl sitting in the cold without complaint, without expectation. "Or she's neither," he said after a moment. "And that's the problem." Outside, Amara shifted again, glancing up and down the street as the wind picked up, carrying the distant sound of sirens and the low hum of traffic. "They really gonna find you?" she asked. Ethan nodded. "They always do." There was no doubt in his voice, no fear, just certainty. Amara studied him for a second longer, then gave a small shrug. "Okay," she said, as if that settled everything. No more questions, no more worry, just acceptance. That simplicity hit harder than anything else. Up in the SUV, Victor leaned forward slightly, his fingers steepled now, his focus narrowing. In his world, certainty came from control, from planning, from force. But the certainty in his son's voice came from something else. Something he had built around the boy without ever explaining it. And now, for the first time, that certainty was being tested not by danger but by something far quieter, something he couldn't control. His gaze returned to Amara, to the way she pulled her jacket tighter, to the way she pretended she wasn't cold, wasn't hungry, wasn't anything that might draw attention. She had given, and now she expected nothing in return. and that didn't fit into any system he understood. "Get ready," Victor said quietly, his voice shifting back to command. The men in the vehicle straightened immediately. Outside, Ethan looked at Amara one more time, his expression unreadable but softer now, like something inside him had shifted just slightly out of place. And somewhere between that quiet realization and the approaching sound of engines turning the corner, the balance between power and innocence was about to break. What if the world didn't just ignore kindness, but mocked it right in front of you? The laughter came first, low, careless, the kind that didn't ask permission before cutting through the moment. Two teenagers leaned against a graffitied wall a few yards away, watching Amara Brooks and the boy with amused disbelief. "You really gave him your food?" one of them called out, shaking his head. "Man, that's wild." The other smirked, taking a sip from a soda can. "Kid's dressed better than both of us, and she's out here feeding him like he's homeless." Amara didn't look up right away. She kept her eyes on the sidewalk, tracing a crack in the concrete with the tip of her shoe, as if the words hadn't landed. But they had. They always did. Her fingers tightened slightly inside her sleeves, the cold no longer the only thing making her uncomfortable. Across from her, Ethan went still, not tense, not afraid, just aware. He turned his head slowly toward the voices, studying them the same way he had studied the sandwich earlier, carefully, quietly, as if measuring something invisible. "You didn't have to do that," he said to Amara, his voice softer now, but carrying a weight it hadn't before. Amara shrugged again, though this time it felt smaller, less certain. "I wanted to," she replied. One of the teenagers laughed louder. "Wanted to? You serious? That's your whole lunch." He gestured toward the empty wrapper in Ethan's hands. "You think he's gonna do the same for you?" The question hung there, sharp and unfair. Amara finally looked up, her eyes meeting theirs for just a second. There was no anger in her expression. No embarrassment. Just a quiet steadiness that didn't match her age. "It's okay," she said simply. He needed it. The simplicity of that answer seemed to confuse them more than anything else. The smirk faded, just slightly. Not gone, but unsettled. Up in the SUV, Victor Hale's gaze hardened as he watched the exchange unfold. This was the variable he had been waiting for. Pressure. Real pressure. Not observation. Not silence. Something that would reveal intention. "Now we'll see," he murmured, almost under his breath. Beside him, one of his men shifted. "You think she folds?" Victor didn't answer. His eyes remained fixed on Amara as the wind picked up again, tugging at her jacket, exposing how thin it really was. She didn't defend herself. She didn't argue. She didn't ask for anything back. She just sat there, accepting the judgment like it was part of the weather. Unpleasant but expected. And that didn't fit. In Victor's world, people reacted. They defended. They negotiated. They protected their interests. But Amara Brooks did none of that. She gave something away, and then stood still while the world questioned her for it. Ethan looked back at her, his expression shifting again, something deeper forming beneath the surface. "They're wrong," he said quietly. Amara glanced at him, surprised. "About what?" He hesitated just for a fraction of a second. "About you." The words landed gently, but they changed something. Not loud, not dramatic, just enough. In the SUV, Victor leaned forward slightly, his attention sharpening. That wasn't part of the pattern. That wasn't how this was supposed to go. His son wasn't supposed to engage, wasn't supposed to defend, wasn't supposed to feel. And yet, here it was. A small crack, barely visible, but real. Victor's fingers tapped once against the leather again. Slower this time. More deliberate. "We move now," he said quietly. The command was calm, controlled, but final. Outside, the sound of engines turning the corner began to rise, low and distant at first, then closer. Amara didn't notice. Not yet. She just looked at Ethan, confused but curious, like she was starting to realize this moment wasn't as simple as it had seemed. And somewhere between the fading laughter of strangers and the approaching presence of something far more powerful, The line between kindness and consequence was about to disappear. In a quiet corner of Brooklyn, a little black girl makes a life-changing choice when she gives away her only meal to a lost child, not knowing he is the son of a powerful mafia boss, setting the stage for an emotional journey filled with tension, humanity, and unexpected connection. This cinematic story explores the extreme contrast between innocence and authority, where the mafia boss observes from the shadows, initially misjudging the girl's intentions, believing kindness must hide a motive, only to witness a moment that challenges everything he understands about control and trust. As the narrative unfolds, subtle clues reveal the hidden truth behind the boy's identity, while the little black girl remains grounded in quiet dignity, unaffected by judgment from passers-by, creating a powerful emotional line that builds from empathy to curiosity and into a deeper moral confrontation. The story captures the essence of dark romance through its emotional intensity and the slow unraveling of a hardened perspective, where power begins to crack under the weight of genuine compassion. Through layered storytelling and dramatic irony, the audience is drawn into a world where the mafia boss's calculated worldview is tested by a simple act of selflessness, transforming suspicion into reflection and ultimately into a silent reckoning. This dark romance narrative emphasizes that true strength lies not in dominance, but in the ability to recognize dignity in its purest form. As the little black girl becomes an unexpected force of change in a world ruled by control. With cinematic pacing, emotionally driven dialogue, and immersive atmosphere, the story delivers a compelling blend of realism and tension, making it a standout example of dark romance storytelling that resonates across audiences. As the mafia boss watches his son respond to kindness in ways he never anticipated, the story deepens into a reflection on values, perception, and the unseen impact of small actions, reinforcing the emotional core that defines dark romance at its finest. Ultimately, this narrative leaves a lasting impression by showing how a single moment of generosity can disrupt power structures and redefine what truly matters, solidifying its place as a powerful and unforgettable dark romance experience. What happens when power finally steps out of the shadows, and innocence doesn't step back? The sound came first. A low, controlled hum of engines rolling onto the block, smooth and deliberate, like the city itself was making room. Amara Brooks looked up this time, her brow tightening slightly as 3 black SUVs turned the corner and slowed, their presence too precise to be random. The teenagers who had been laughing just moments ago fell quiet, stepping aside instinctively, their confidence dissolving into uncertainty. Something about those vehicles didn't belong to their world. Across from her, Ethan didn't move. He didn't look surprised. He didn't look relieved. He simply watched, his posture straightening just a fraction, as if something long expected had finally arrived. Amara noticed that. She noticed everything. "Those for you?" she asked, half joking, half serious. Ethan didn't answer right away. The first SUV came to a stop, doors opening in quiet unison. Men stepped out, well-dressed, composed, their movements efficient but not rushed. They didn't shout. They didn't draw attention. But the air changed the moment their feet touched the pavement. People felt it. Amara felt it. The space around them seemed to tighten, like the world had suddenly decided this moment mattered more than anything else happening on the street. One of the men approached, his gaze scanning quickly before settling on Ethan. There was no panic in his expression, only confirmation. "Sir," he said, his voice low, respectful, not loud enough for everyone to hear, but clear enough that it carried weight. Amara blinked, her eyes shifting between the man and Ethan. "Sir? That didn't make sense. Not here. Not like this." Ethan stood up slowly, brushing his hands together, the last trace of crumbs falling to the ground. For a brief second, he looked like any other kid, small, quiet, slightly out of place. But then he lifted his chin just a little, and something about him changed. Not physically, not dramatically, just enough to make the difference undeniable. "You took your time," he said calmly. "No fear. No confusión. Just quiet expectation." The man inclined his head slightly. "We had to be certain." Amara's heart skipped, not from fear, but from the sudden realization that she didn't understand anything about what was happening anymore. The boy she had just shared her lunch with wasn't just a boy. Behind them, the second SUV door opened. Slowly, deliberately, Victor Hale stepped out. The world didn't stop, but it shifted. His presence didn't demand attention, commanded it without asking. The tailored coat, the measured stride, the stillness in his gaze. It all carried a kind of authority that didn't need to be explained. Conversations nearby faded. Movement slowed. Even the wind seemed quieter as he approached. Amara stayed where she was, her hands gripping the edge of the step beneath her. She didn't run. She didn't look away. She just watched, her expression steady, even as the distance between her and something far beyond her world disappeared step by step. Victor's eyes moved from Ethan to Amara, taking in the details with practiced precision. The thin jacket, the empty hands, the absence of expectation. For a moment he said nothing. Neither did she. And in that silence, louder than anything that had come before, two completely different worlds finally stood face to face, with no space left between them.